My name is Alyssa Isaac, and I work as an assistant psychologist with the Isle of Man Mental Health Service. In this video, I'm going to be discussing two extremely important topics when it comes to mental health: suicide and self-harm. I understand that these topics can be a little bit uncomfortable and sometimes upsetting to discuss, so I'd like you to be mindful of your own well-being while you watch the video and take a break if necessary. I'm going to be talking about the difference between suicide and self-harm, risk factors and warning signs, and how you can support somebody that you feel may be at risk. Data from the Office for National Statistics states that there were over 6,500 completed suicides in the UK in 2018, and 3/4 of those were men. Although the Isle of Man has a much smaller population, information from the Public Health Directorate on Ireland suggests that the suicide rate per 100,000 is comparable to that of the UK. These figures aren't meant to scare you, but rather to demonstrate why it is so important for us to keep having these conversations. If you haven't already been touched by suicide at some point in your life, chances are in the future you will come across somebody who is experiencing suicidal thoughts, and it's really important that you know how to support them. Before I go any further, I would just like to dispel some popular myths about suicide that you may have heard. The first of these is that people who talk about suicide or who threaten to kill themselves aren't serious and won't go through with it. And this is a really dangerous myth to believe. We can't 100% guarantee whether or not somebody will attempt to take their own lives, but if somebody is talking about suicide, we need to take it seriously. Often people who have taken their own lives have previously spoken about wanting to die or about feeling hopeless or that they have no future. So whether or not you believe that somebody is merely looking for attention, it's important that you always take any talk about suicide seriously, because we can't guarantee what that person will or will not do. Another myth is that once somebody has decided to take their own lives, there's absolutely nothing that we can do to stop them. The fact is that our thoughts and our emotions are very rarely fixed. They're constantly changing. And it's the same with suicidal thoughts and urges. If somebody is expressing strong urges to harm themselves, then it's critical that they're given support to keep themselves safe until those urges pass, and they normally do. With the right support going forward, people can learn how to successfully manage their suicidal thoughts and even recover from them. Finally, there's the myth that asking or talking about suicide with somebody will put the idea in their heads or make it more likely that they'll go on to harm themselves. And there is absolutely no truth to this whatsoever. There is no evidence to suggest that asking about suicide will give anybody the idea. And in fact, it's extremely important that we be confident and comfortable asking directly about suicide. It can be really intimidating and scary for somebody to admit that they're having those kinds of thoughts, and asking them about it directly gives them the opportunity to open up about something that they otherwise might be keeping to themselves. You never have to be afraid to ask about suicide, and you could save somebody's life if you do. While you can't know for sure whether or not somebody is suicidal without asking them directly, there are some factors that put people at a higher risk for suicidal behavior. These include things like any previous attempts that they've made on their life, any family history of suicide, having access to lethal means or ways to end their lives, having been diagnosed with a mental health issue, living with a debilitating or terminal illness, being socially isolated, having been unemployed for more than 1 month, being homeless, misusing alcohol or drugs, having experienced a recent loss, and suffering from bullying, abuse, neglect, or trauma. I'm now going to talk about self-harm, which is a term used to describe any non-suicidal behaviors that inflict physical pain on the body. Although self-harm can sometimes look similar to suicidal actions, the intentions behind it are very different. With suicide, the intention is for someone to take their own life. People self-harm for a variety of reasons, such as wanting to communicate feelings of distress to others, relieving emotional pain, regaining a sense of control, or as a method of self-punishment. It's important to remember that self-harm and suicide are distinct. Not all people who self-harm will be suicidal, and not all people who are suicidal self-harm, but the risk of suicide does increase with self-harm because some people may accidentally harm themselves more than they intended to. In order to support someone that you feel may be self-harming or suicidal, just remember alert. Approach, listen, explain, reinforce, and take time. Plan your approach carefully if you can. Choose a time when you can really spend some time with the person and listen to them, and a place that feels comfortable and private to allow them to open up. If you've noticed any warning signs or worrying behavior, it's okay to communicate that to the person. Tell them what you've noticed, that you're concerned, and that you want to help. If you feel that somebody is at immediate risk of harm to themselves, make sure that you don't leave them alone, but you seek out immediate assistance. The Crisis Response and Home Treatment Team is available 24/7 on island and can be reached at 642-860. Failing that, you can always call the police and they'll be able to give you advice. Once you've expressed your concern, it's time to listen. So really focus on what the other person is saying and focus on their feelings, their thoughts, and their experiences. Remember, if you have a gut feeling, it's okay to ask very clearly and directly about suicide, if they're having any thoughts, if they have a plan, and if you feel that they're at immediate risk of harm to themselves, you need to get someone else involved, so call the crisis team. Try not to express any negative judgments or shock, and avoid using guilt. Phrases like, think of your family, or how could you be so selfish, are rarely effective and will only make the other person feel worse. Instead, try to say things like, I'm sorry you feel that way, it sounds really painful. I hear what you're saying and I want you to keep talking to me. And reflect back to them what you've heard to make sure that you've understood correctly. Next, you'll want to reinforce the information that you provided. You can tell them that suicidal thoughts are common, but this doesn't mean that they need to be acted upon, and the urges will often pass on their own. Remind them that you care, that you're there to help, and that you want to support them. Remind them that there is effective help available on island for them to access, and give them hope for recovery. Lastly, make sure to take the time to look after yourself. Supporting somebody who's suicidal or self-harming can be really distressing, and it's really important that you look after your own well-being, and if you need to, find somebody that you can confide in and who can support you. Thank you for taking the time to listen.